After months of waiting, multiple delays, and a rocky start, the time has finally come to head to Enoch and explore the deepest regions of space. Hey there friends, it's Codiak here, one half of the team behind Legacy Gaming, and after a combined 200 hours of Outriders, Livid and I are here to break down everything we think about the game and share if it's actually worth your time. We think for a lot of people out there, Outriders was this white knight type of game. It promised a lot of things that are popular with modern gamers, like crossplay, highly customizable game systems, no live service model, no in-game store. Because of all that, the game was elevated to this pedestal. That's why when launch came around and this happened, well, shit kinda got knocked off course. Server issues are all too familiar in the modern era, and whether you choose to get upset about that or not is a discussion for another day. Needless to say, the launch to Outriders wasn't perfect. In fact, the launch is kind of a disaster, and it will further fuel the fire of people who say always online games aren't a good thing. Today, however, we want to focus on the rest of Outriders, the story, the gunplay, the customization, and drill down on the things that worked and the things that didn't. But before we dive too deep, let's take a 30,000-foot approach to the game. Outriders is a third-person looter shooter that combines a lot of popular systems from a lot of popular games. It's a strange hybrid between Gears of War and Diablo, and for the most part, that formula works decently well. You're an outrider that's been awoken after being in cryosleep for 30 years, only to find out that the world of Enoch is in absolute shambles. A strange anomaly killed many, turned the world into a hostile wasteland, and ultimately turned friend against friend, plunging the world into constant war. When you awaken, you realize you've been changed and altered, and this is where your journey truly starts. I won't spoil anything for anyone in this review, but I will give you a brief sense of the overall story. It's dark, with touches of humor sprinkled in that sometimes work and sometimes don't. As you'd expect, there's not much to be cheery about when the world is crumbling all around you. About halfway through, Outriders takes a bit of a twist and leans heavy into the sci-fi roots and really doubles down on this towards the end of the story. But if I'm being honest with you guys, all but a couple of the story beats were pretty lackluster and left us wanting more. Sure, the story is okay with decent enough writing, but we're not talking about a masterpiece here by any stretch. There are some colorful characters along the way, but it's hard to ever feel truly attached to any of them. Cinematic moments are often paced strangely, and the writers relied on far too many cliches and stereotypical tropes to drive a message home. We might as well also talk about the total length of the story, which took us around 12 hours to complete. Excluding the 50+ side missions in the game may take the average player closer to 15 to 20 hours depending on if they hit any roadblocks in their progression along the way. Those other 50+ side quests we mentioned are actually some of the better content in terms of dialogue in the game, adding around 15 to 20 hours of additional gameplay. Endgame is a whole other animal that we'll talk about a little later in the review. If you don't mind a bit of tongue-in-cheek dark humor, we don't think you'll mind the plot, but if you're looking for the gold standard in video game storytelling, I'm afraid this isn't it. While the story may not be perfect, where Outriders really shines is in the moment-to-moment gameplay, which Livid and I both thoroughly enjoyed. In fact, we enjoyed it a lot. As an Altered, you have access to a wide variety of anomaly-infused abilities, and while all are clearly not made equal, the low cooldowns and unique nature of these made them a nice addition to the traditional gunplay. As a Trickster main, the class capable of manipulating time and space, I found myself experimenting with different abilities regularly, trying to use those to fill in the gaps in my gameplay. This isn't always the case though, and there are some clear discrepancies with the classes. At the time of making this video, the Technomancer, a long-range class that combines frost and toxic abilities, is far superior to every other class in the game, able to pump out incredible damage all while barely losing health. Luckily, this doesn't take away from the fun aspect of each of the other classes, but it's a clear discrepancy in power that can sometimes make the leveling process extremely polarizing, with some classes such as the Technomancer able to blaze through content, while others such as the Devastator really do struggle along the way. We do fully expect some of these things to be adjusted at some point during the game's lifespan. Each of the four classes, the Trickster, Technomancer, Devastator, and Pyromancer, brings something different to the table in the form of unique abilities, and each class excels at a different aspect of the game. There are also clear metas forming with each of the classes, almost requiring that you take certain abilities if you want to succeed. This isn't ideal considering there are 8 abilities with each class to explore, but it's what we're working with at this point. You truly see this in action when playing with friends in online co-op. With a full party of 3, it's fun to experience the synergy between classes as you rush from area to area, decimating foes and pushing your progression forward. We personally think it's a strange decision to have 4 classes and only 3-person parties, but after experiencing the game from start to finish multiple times on different classes, both solo and as varying group sizes, we can respect and understand the developer's choice. Outriders is a tailored experience from top to bottom, and that includes the level design, which is heavily inspired by Gears of War. Tight sections lead into slightly larger open areas, but it's all confined to a very specific boundary. I like to think of it as slightly shifting paintball arenas because that's what it reminds me of. Simple layouts with a number of obstacles to hide behind and rarely any extreme complexity. While this may appeal to a section of players, it will undoubtedly turn off others. The biggest issue with handcrafted experiences, and do keep in mind every single level in this game from start to finish is handcrafted, is that for something that is meant to be replayable, at a certain point it just becomes repetitive. We definitely think this is much more apparent in the story progression than the endgame expeditions, purely because, one, you're meant to take your time with the story and enjoy and explore, and the other directly requires you to compete as fast as possible, often meaning the static layout gets easily overlooked by the chaos that ensues atop it. Combat is where Outriders really shines, and let me tell you, the gunplay alone is easily one of the high points. It never gets less exciting seeing dozens of enemies explode into tiny bits as you push through wildly different environments. The guns are snappy, and overall you have a wide variety of weapons to choose from. Assault weapons like ARs, double guns, LMGs, and SMGs make up a sizable portion of the weapons in the game, with others such as shotguns, rifles, and various sidearms mixed in there as well. They all bring a specific use to the battlefield and synergize in different ways with different classes and the respective skill trees, meaning a lot of weapons in the game are completely viable, and that's really fantastic. Metas do develop, however, and as of this review, ARs, LMGs, and shotguns very clearly compete for being kings of damage, with some of the other archetypes falling just a bit behind. We're not saying the other guns aren't viable, they just lag behind. One of the fantastic things about the weapons in the game are the numerous variants that you can use to adjust to fit your playstyle and build, often making them perform vastly different and even changing the weapon's overall stats. There are a ton of weapons in the game, especially on the legendary front. Seriously, just take a look at some of these. The developers have really made legendary loot feel and look legendary. Our only real gripe is that the epic loot gets slightly shafted because of how good legendary loot is, and everything ends up feeling sort of the same. Because everything is rooted in semi-realistic manner, it's hard to branch out, and the design of the weapons themselves all start to feel kinda same-ish. Players also have access to a supercharged melee attack, which feels fantastic and useful in its own right, often providing players with utilities such as freeze to lock down enemies, or burn to combo with your abilities immediately after. The constant switching between weapons, abilities, and melee attacks keeps the moment-to-moment gameplay engaging, but even though a lot of things hit, there are still some glaring issues. For instance, while cover in the game can be utilized by the player, more often than not, you're just meant to ignore it, and it becomes more of an environmental asset that the enemies are meant to use. Issues happen, however, in more difficult instances where you need to use cover, but your character has issues responding and snapping to that cover, often resulting in a death that feels like the game was fighting you the whole time. Then there's a lack of directional audio and impact feedback, leading to issues identifying where you're being shot from in hectic situations, and once again, leading to your death. All of that feels really bad considering you lose progression to a certain point whenever you die, and with a lot of deaths not being directly your fault, those moments feel really terrible. Additionally, I had a really hard time getting immersed in a game that constantly recycles enemies. There were a handful of archetypes, but throughout the game, those never varied or changed. There was a new skin, maybe a slight variation to the toolkit, but ultimately it felt like I was fighting the same thing from start to finish. This is more apparent with the Poforo, the monster-like creatures transformed by the anomaly. You'll spend countless hours cutting down the same 4 or 5 types of minions, and it really leaves a lot to be desired. Even the monster hunts, which are beefed up variations of this same activity, never really break out of that mold. The design of the enemies themselves are alright, and besides the snipers, who clearly ate their Wheaties this morning, things all fall squarely in line in terms of balance. I just wish there was more variety to really change up the experience long term. Next up, we have to talk about crafting, and man oh man, is this one of the best instances of crafting we have ever seen in a looter shooter. With most other games, loot quickly becomes obsolete, and you're left discarding things over and over, even in the endgame when RNG just decides to mess with you. To all of this, Outriders is easily becoming the gold standard, and it's the system with which Outriders itself is built upon. Every single piece of gear that you get in the game is able to be leveled up with titanium, a rare resource early on that becomes easier to get in the endgame. You can change the variant on weapons, completely changing the playstyle of a specific weapon. There's also random attributes that roll on weapons and armor, and those can be improved over time. Even the mods can be replaced, albeit just one of the two at max, in order to make your gear perform how you want it to. It's the perfect blend of RNG when searching for new gear and allowing you to customize everything to how you want it to be after acquiring it. The amazing thing about the way the modding system works in Outriders is that you take pieces of gear that randomly have different mods, or sets of mods if they are legendary, and you disassemble them to acquire the mods permanently in your library. The library itself is on a per character basis, but it allows you to infinitely tinker with your builds as long as you have the upgraded resources needed. This gives an insane amount of flexibility to players as they test out different builds and tackle the various challenges the game throws at them. Builds become absolutely essential in the endgame, and no matter how good you are as a player, without the proper build, you'll just end up hitting a roadblock. It's the true final piece of the puzzle that unlocks the rest of the Outriders experience and is easily the most impressive thing about the game. We've talked at length about the shooter part of this looter shooter, but we should also talk about the loot. We've alluded to it already, but when it comes to Outriders, legendaries are the key, and the People Can Fly team do a great job making them feel unique. Of course, every item is only as good as its mod, which can be stripped down and used elsewhere, but because you can only swap out one mod at a time, there's still a place for these legendary items at the top of the hierarchy. Gone are the days of farming captains for hours on end like we did in the demo. The developers give players plenty of opportunities to farm for loot via boss fights, repeatable side quests, bounties, monster hunts, and endgame expeditions. Some sources even guarantee legendaries, but those time commitments are often much greater. It's a decent way to help players offset bad RNG or those who just aren't interested in farming the endgame. There are avenues for everyone to chase down those ultimate prizes, but the developers don't distort that feeling of success once you've reached the top of the mountain. Farming Challenge Tier 15 expeditions has a 25% chance to drop a legendary if you complete it at Gold Tier, which is absurd. But to reach that point, well, you have to be an Apex player. The balance is near perfect, with casual and hardcore players getting enough of that pie that it feels special, and enough variety in the mix with over 200 legendary items that it doesn't feel like you're chasing the same thing endlessly. Sadly, this same attention to detail wasn't placed on those epic items which we've talked about before, and it becomes a common factor in the endgame to need these. But if you're playing at that level, you hardly care about a few cosmetics and are much more concerned about pushing forward. We've talked about it a few times now, but let's wrap this up by talking about the endgame content, expeditions. It's no secret that a majority of the players will want to get to this point, and the truth is, they're great. These handcrafted levels provide the perfect time trial, replayable challenge for solo players or groups, and are always difficult. Sure, you can have the best build in the world and be one of the top players in the game, but for the rest of us, these are going to be satisfying and, yes, sometimes frustrating experiences. Expeditions function off a challenge tier system independent from the world tier difficulty system in the story mode. Expeditions allow players to push their gear to the max level and provide new challenges in familiar, but not copy and pasted locations. The faster you complete an expedition, the more loot you get, and if you're at the cutting edge, your challenge tier levels up and you can move on to the next difficulty. Each of the expeditions are designed to be familiar, based on the locations players have experienced in the story. But unfortunately, there is a lack of diversity in design that does become apparent rather quickly. The unique aspects of them are fun, but without random elements, it all suffers from that sameness we talked about earlier. Same layouts, same monsters, same sequence of combat. Nothing ever varies, and while this is designed to give players the chance to learn more each time they attempt an expedition, the ultimate experience feels muted. I don't want to take away from the enjoyment of the gameplay loop here, because it's great. Expeditions take around 10 to 20 minutes and are a perfect bite of content, but their staying power is limited by their lack of variability. If more content ever does come to the game, and I want to be clear here, that's not a certainty by any stretch, expeditions are one of the areas that could really use some more development to take it to that next level. After nearly 200 combined hours spread between Livid and myself, there is no doubt that Outriders is worth your time. It's exactly what we expected from the game, and overall, our experience has been enjoyable. Is it a masterpiece? No, sadly not. But there is enough here that players will get their money's worth, no doubt. Yes, there were server issues during week 1, and that reignites the argument about always online games, but those are a blip on the radar in the grand scheme of things. By the time new players watch this video and pick up the game, things will be stabilized and people will get to experience Outriders as it was intended to be played. I think Livid and I both agree that the game could do with some more development, and while the People Can Fly team say that Outriders is a complete experience, I think the success of the game is going to change their tune. There is so much more to unpack here, and with the launch now behind the developers, I'm anxious to see if the team decides to go back to the apple and take another bite. If you're watching this video and are unsure about the game, don't worry, there is a free demo that is still live that you can check out right now on any platform. The game is also on Game Pass, so if you want a snapshot of what Outriders is, there are opportunities out there to see if you're interested. Outriders is something we've been covering for a long time, so if there is a particular topic you'd like to learn more about, I encourage you to check out our full Outriders playlist and dozens of other videos. You want deep dives? We got them. You want to see some gameplay? We've got that too. Everything a budding Outrider could ever want. So for around $60 or on the Game Pass, what are you getting? Outriders is a solid third-person looter shooter with engaging gameplay, an okay story, and endgame content that will keep you hooked for hours. The game's crafting system is a true gem and the highlight of the experience. With crossplay fully enabled across all systems, it's easy to link up with friends and take on the perils of Enoch together. We hope this video helped you figure out if Outriders is worth your time. If you enjoyed this series and you want more worth your time videos in your feed, go ahead and hit that thumbs up and consider subscribing to Legacy Gaming. If you choose to pick it up, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on the game, either in the comments below or head on over to our Discord. Our community of over 6,000 members is spread across dozens of great games, so if you're looking for some awesome people to hang out with or want to stay up to date with our videos, consider becoming part of the Legacy. My name is Codiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.